What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and after 2 long years, we return with a familiar face. We are here with Ben from Khemmis. Thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, right on. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Yeah, it's so awesome to have you here. So, your newest EP, which is Doomed Heavy Metal, which features 3 new tracks as well as 3 live tracks. One thing I was kind of curious about is every time a band puts out an EP, I always kind of like wonder this. Could this serve as maybe like kind of like a preview of what the follow-up to your previous record, Desolation, would be like, or is this maybe kind of like it stands out still in the Chemist catalog?
That's a really good question, and I think for a lot of bands it would make sense that it's sort of a teaser of what's to come, but in our case it's really more of a retrospective. Of the 3 studio tracks, only one is technically new, the Dio cover. The other 2 we recorded in 2017, early 2017. The song A Conversation with Death was featured on a 7-inch split we did with Spirit Adrift, very good friends of ours. And the other song, Empty Throne, was for a decibel flexi. So really what you're seeing is sort of, in some ways at least, with those songs, a snapshot of pre-Desolation Khemmis. But in terms of the way that we approached the release as a whole, honestly, every Friday, and Zach got us started doing this, we listen to Fandango by ZZ Top. When we're on tour, we both throw it on in the van. When we're all, by our lonesomes, as it were, we'll throw it on in our houses. And it's sort of a ritual, right? And there's something about that record that is loose and high energy and feels like a love letter to fans, because you've got some, rare studio cuts and you've got some live tracks. And I don't think ZZ Top, when they released Fandango, were thinking this is going to be, the most important entry into our catalog. They were doing it as a way to sort of share this sort of raw, unfiltered version of themselves with anyone that would listen, but especially their fans. And I personally have always found that very endearing. It's very honest. It's very naked and raw. And even though you've got the studio tracks, they're not in the context of a full album, right? So they have to be able to tell some kind of story on their own. They have to be worth listening to on their own. And so we wound up in a position where we had some studio cuts laying around that we had never really put out on a larger format. The Spirit Adrift split was limited to a couple hundred units. The Decibel Flexi was only for subscribers, so most people have never heard these songs, unless they played that Man of Medan video game that had Conversation with Death in it. Mm. And then we did a special 2-night event here in Denver a couple years ago that we called 2 Nights of Doomed Heavy Metal. And what we wanted to do with those was sort of show the 2 sides of Khemmis, the doomier, slower side, and then the heavy metal side, the side that worships at the altar of classic metal and old school death metal and thrash metal, and that it's all filtered through us. So we played 2 different sets on those nights. One set was extremely, extremely slow, and then the other one was much more high energy. And we wound up recording those nights with the help of our friend Dave Otero and our other friend Chris Limos, who also plays guitar in a band called Church. And so we had all this material, and we were like, we're not going to have an album out for another year or so, but we want to do something special. We want to do something to sort of commemorate this moment in Khemmis, sort of look back at how far we've come and the sort of evolution of our sound, and also offer this, again, sort of raw, unfiltered side of ourselves up, especially for our fans who have never gotten to see us live. We don't tour all the time. We've been hitting it fairly hard the last couple of years, but especially for Europe, there's a lot of European fans who, right now, thanks to COVID-19, aren't going to get to see us until maybe the end of the year or next year. And so it's a way to sort of say, if you've gotten to see us live, let's share those memories, let's relive those experiences, and if you haven't, here's what you can look forward to. Here's something to sort of keep you going and keep you feeling sort of empowered and motivated, and however Khemmis' music makes you feel, we like to think that the live version is that much more intense.
Yeah. Wow, you pretty much just answered every question I had in advance of this interview, so we could go now. We'll see it. Well, because really you brought up a good point. Because when you look at the Khemmis catalog, whether it's Absolution or Hunted or Desolation or even this EP, like it's kind of almost representative on who you and the other guys were at that particular time, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that also informs our choice of the live tracks too, right? We wanted to have one from each album because each of these albums is a snapshot of where we were collectively and as individuals. The Bereaved is really the first song that we wrote as a band that felt and sounded like a Khemmis song. It was the first song we wrote for the album Absolution, and that was when we sort of started to hone in on the big soaring melodic feelings and the Thin Lizzy, Iron Maiden kind of guitar harmonies, and then you just sort of see the trajectory from there. And so yeah, it's a nice sort of encapsulation of the last I don't know how long we've been a band, 30, 40 years at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been crazy. Like when it comes to like the songwriting and stuff, like is there ever like a preconceived idea that you enter the studio or you enter with, like you know what you want to do, or has there always been like a lot of improvising in the Khemmis catalog? Because I always feel like your music is very raw and very organic, so I'd imagine that the writing process is just as organic as you guys sound, right?
Yeah, that's it. Like Phil and I always come in with ideas in one of two ways. Well, either we always have a Dropbox folder going of new riff ideas, because anytime I sit down at the computer, I've got my guitar. I live in an apartment, so I can't just plug into an Orange full stack anytime, but I'll plug into my computer and demo ideas, and that happens anywhere from once a week to every day in a week. And so we'll have these ideas, but really we try to approach those less as hard and fast rules about what a song is going to be, and more as sort of just the building blocks of a song, the raw elements. Because you might come in and say, I've got riff A, B, and C, and you play it for everyone, and they don't hear it the way you do, but the way they all hear it, the filter of the other three sort of takes it in this new direction. And that's what happens to all of our ideas that makes them Khemmis ideas instead of Ben ideas or Phil ideas or what have you. The other part of coming in with ideas is that I especially try to think real broadly about how I want a piece of music to make me feel. And I say, anytime we're writing a song, I'll say, it should elicit this kind of feeling. I want it to feel, dark or depressing or uplifting, or, it needs to have this vibe, much more so than I'll say, the riff should be played on the 3rd, 6th, and 7th frets or something like that, because there's a lot of ways to get to a certain set of feelings in music, especially when you're dealing with more than one instrument. And I think we've gotten really good as a group about not feeling confined to a single, scale or particular key, that we know there are certain ways that we tend to get to a feeling, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the only way for us to write a heavy, dumb, sludgy part, or an aggressive trad metal part, or what have you.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I was curious about is, you mentioned like this feeling. Does this feeling like come out of nowhere sometimes, or do you kind of have to like put yourself in a certain like atmosphere or a certain sort of mood in order for ideas or even that said feeling to come through?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think it's a mixture of the two. I think that there are certainly times when, like for instance, Phil might come in with a riff, and something about the collection of notes just sort of makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I say, that's great. I feel like that idea wants to go. We often sort of talk about these ideas as though they are sentient beings. Like, this idea wants to do this, or it wants to take us to this place. And in that sense, I think it's sort of letting the music drive us however it's going to. At the same time, anytime we all get together, it's not in a vacuum, right? If one or all of us are having, a really awesome streak in life, like that's going to inform how we respond to ideas, the kind of ideas that we bring in, how motivated we are to pursue one idea versus another. At the same time, if things are pretty dark, or for one of us or a couple of us, or if we're all having a real shit time of it, then that's also going to not necessarily like keep us from being productive, but it will, one way or another, change how we approach writing a given piece of music. Mm-hmm. But I don't think those experiences or emotions exist in a vacuum. So just because one of us is having a rough time, honestly, the happiest place for all of us is going to be together. And I realize as I say that how crunchy and granola and hippie that sounds, but it's true that you get the four of us together in a room, and like you're probably going to see the best version of the four of us. Mm-hmm. And so that sort of collective energy, that collective set of experiences, and that shared history, the fact that we've been doing this together for, I don't know, what is this, like our 7th year, 8th year as a band? We trust ourselves to sort of let the experience and be in the moment and let that guide us, rather than trying to have any sort of hard and fast expectation that like, no, it has to be this, or no, I wrote this riff and it goes this way. Yeah. That, for several years now, we've had the rule that no idea is precious. It doesn't matter how much you love that set of notes, if you bring it in and it's not doing it for everyone else, well, that idea goes in the trash.
That's something I've admired about Khemmis. Like the first time I interviewed you, I interviewed all 4 of you guys, and most of the time interviewing the entirety of a band is always a catastrophe, because there's always that one member who sits there awkwardly silent or whatever. But you guys, like all 4 of you, were very articulate and all had your own unique answers. So that brings me into my next question, where like you find it easier to have a song written or even come up with ideas when you're in the company of your other band members. It's really, isolation doesn't really kind of like do it for you.
Yeah, and again, like it's having that raw material to work with. So it's not like we come in and we just say, well, let's start doing stuff. Like, we've got this shared Dropbox folder, and Zach in particular has a really keen ear for listening through ideas that I've been uploading. He might listen to a riff that I uploaded 9 months ago and something Phil put up last week, and hear a way that they work together that the rest of us didn't, so that when we get together, he's like, look, I'm feeling like these 2 things can work together. And we all get genuinely excited about that, because there is that collaborative dimension to it, where it's not like you played this because I want it to sound like this. It's having enough faith in everyone else in that room that they're going to put their fair share in, and that they're going to sort of bring their magic to the table, as it were, to make something that we all feel a sense of shared ownership of. Mm-hmm.
Is there ever a time where maybe like a concept or a story or a subject matter could also determine the composition or how you guys play, or are lyrics and stories kind of like secondary in a way?
Yeah, it's more so the latter. We generally don't start really thinking about lyrics or overarching themes until we've got a structure for at least a few songs. We've talked, for instance, for the next album, we talked very briefly about some possible sort of avenues for it, but it's the kind of thing that the music has to inform the story before you can tell the story. Otherwise, for the way that we write and feel about writing, at least, it feels like we're doing it backwards, that we're trying to sort of superimpose something onto the music. But for us, the music comes first. And then that's the sort of canvas on which we can, paint the scene with lyrics and album art and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. And like one thing I was also really curious about is I've seen Khemmis live now, I want to say 3 times, just recently on the summer tour you did with Cloak.
Oh yeah, that was a fun show at Vitus.
That was one of the hottest days ever, but it was so much fun.
Yeah, it was intense. Yeah.
But then I also saw you on it was a Decibel tour, right? With Enslaved, Wolves in the Throne Room, and Merker.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then that show I interviewed you at St. Vitus before, and it's such a different experience seeing you live than just simply listening to the album. But for you guys, is there maybe a similar energy or maybe a similar creative element to playing live as it is when you're songwriting or when you're practicing, or is it like a completely separate art that you have to master altogether?
I think it's that, because I know some bands sort of like will work out new material when they're sound checking or whatever, but for whatever set of reasons, we tend to approach them as two related but distinct practices. And there's a catharsis in both, but the thing about writing together is that it's the four of us, and we know that eventually other people will hear what we produce, but in the moment, it's the four of us. But when you put us on stage, we're doing something with other people. And that energy, like when you see us, we take a lot of pride in being a high energy band, especially considering that most of our songs are under 100 BPMs, that we're up there doing the work, and we're up there really offering ourselves up to the crowd, because, I mean, performing music for other people, and not just for, but with other people, because a show is not a show without other people there. It's just practice then, right? Mm-hmm. There's something kind of sacred about that. And you can think about it being sacred in like super religious terms, or just in terms of the fact that there's something special and beautiful about that moment, and it's never going to happen again the same way. No show's going to be the same way, no crowd response is going to be the same way, and there's no guarantee that just because people are at this show, anyone will ever be at any other show. So we try to keep that in perspective, that we're fortunate enough to have people that want to, come see us live and sort of share that experience with us, and it's something we absolutely don't ever want to take for granted. Mm-hmm. And so we think it's our obligation as musicians, as artists, as people who have been similarly moved by other performances, to make it as intense and compelling as possible. Otherwise, what the hell's the point of doing it in the first place?
Yeah, you treat every show basically like you're trying to make a good first impression.
Exactly. I hate the cliche about you got to live every day like it's your last, or play every show like it's your last. Like, I get the idea, but I like your framing much more, that I'm trying to win people over, even if I've already won them over. I want them to remember why they care about this music, and not just ours, why they care about music at all. Like, I feel really passionately about the role of music and art in the human existence, and sort of in sharing the human condition. And I'm, without saying it explicitly, I'm trying to reassure the people in the crowd that, like, we're in this together, and that what they're experiencing in that moment is powerful and beautiful, and is something that they should always feel excited about and proud of.
Definitely. And here comes the final question, and most difficult question of the interview. And I don't believe I asked this with you guys last time. So, but being a band that's categorized in the realm of doom metal, how do you know when a song is done?
Wow. Like a lot of things with songwriting, it's sort of hard to articulate in a way that sounds like I have any idea what I'm talking about. My first response really is that we just kind of know. There's a sense of resolution, both melodically, that it feels like whatever the set of concepts in a song are, they have resolved in a satisfying musical way, but also in a more sort of highfalutin way. Music, I think, should take you on a journey. Now, that journey might be a small one. It might be a journey, around your hometown or your city or the country or outer space, whatever. But a journey has to have some sort of satisfying resolution. It doesn't have to be a happy ending, but it has to be an ending. And one of the things that we've focused on for a long time with our songwriting is telling stories. And we like the idea of telling multi-layered stories, that the music itself tells a story, the lyrics tell a story, the album artwork and the insert artwork tells a story. And they might be related, but they don't have to be the same story. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't change the fact that for all of them, any good story has to have drama, has to have conflict, and has to have resolution.
Yep.
And when it comes to, especially in the world of doom, I think doom has been maybe unfairly characterized as being overly reliant on the riff. And like, look, heavy metal is about the riff. Black Sabbath, the song Black Sabbath, is about that riff. There's really only one riff in that song. I mean, like, there's two, but there's really just the one. And yet, that song tells a story. It takes you somewhere.
Yeah.
I think that for any kind of rock-based music, finding that balance between, music that is compelling on its own, but that also supports the larger structure of the song is a difficult balance to find and maintain. And I think if you learn to trust yourself a little bit and you learn to recognize that feeling of like, nope, we've gone somewhere. If we try to make it go any further, then it's contrived. Or no, it doesn't feel like we've told the whole story yet. If you learn to trust your gut on those feelings, then I think that's one of the keys, at least, to learning how to write a song that people like.
Yeah, well, mentioning the whole story concept, I totally agree with you, because when I was listening to Desolation, and like I was telling people about the record, some people are like, "Oh, what song do you recommend I start off with?" I'm like, "No, you need to listen to Desolation. Start off with Bloodletting and end with From Ruin. Make sure that Flesh to Nothing is song number 3 or 4, wherever that was on the record, and you get the idea. Like, I feel like your song, like, I can't listen to a Khemmis record on shuffle. You know what I mean?" So I think you make a good point that like you do have like an introduction, a climax, a conclusion, and all that involved.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think that it's fine for lots of people to write albums that are a collection of songs that may or may not be related, but I don't even know if the four of us could do that outside of this band, but I do know that in the context of this band, we write for an album. And that's when we do our best writing. The idea of writing songs as one-offs is very hard for us because we sort of instinctively want to write more and have more songs and sort of build on that idea. And so, yeah, I think that's cool that you would tell me, like, no, just look, set aside 43 minutes of your day and just put it on and just trust me. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that record's only 43 minutes? I thought this was new metal.
I don't know. It's something like... Well, I mean, so it's funny you say that. I mean, that's why we have called ourselves for a while now Doomed Heavy Metal. And honestly, like, calling this EP, mini, LP, whatever you want to call it, Doomed Heavy Metal, is very... It's partly tongue-in-cheek for us because, let's be honest, we called an album something heavy metal. Like, that could not be more like Heavy Metal the movie if we tried. But we're also doing it to sort of assert, like, this is what it is. We're not a doom band. We don't, even if we write long songs, which our songs keep getting shorter and shorter, which, for us is like 6 minutes instead of 10, but they still, like, we have tried to find ways to still tell compelling stories and make these songs tighter and make them move more and make them, sort of reflect where we are as people more. I don't find myself listening to 20-minute songs the way that I did, 10 years ago. I might circle back around to that in 10 years, but like I spend a lot of time listening to Steely Dan, and you talk about a band that could tell a story in 3 minutes, like, Jesus, like, Becker and Fagan, like, mastered that art. I don't know that Khemmis can write a song that's 2.5 or 3 minutes long. That'd be like 2 riffs.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to do, but I also don't really understand what, like, correct me if I'm wrong, and sorry if we're going over time right now, but like...
No, we're fine.
What exactly, like, because, okay, you guys are considered doom metal, but Sleep is also considered doom metal, but Catatonia is also considered doom metal. I feel like doom is like one of the only subgenres that went off and spawned its own collection of its other subgenres.
I mean, yes, but I would suggest the same thing's true of death metal, right? When someone says death metal, they could be talking about Cannibal Corpse. They could be talking about At the Gates. They could be talking about In Flames. Are they talking about Death Doom? Are they talking about Esoteric? That's a band that has 25-minute long songs. Are they more death or are they doom? Are you talking about tech death bands like Archspire? Are you talking about, whatever, brutal slam death, stuff like Devourment? So it's the sort of sub-genre-ification of music, I think, is fine because, one, it allows bands to sort of position themselves and say, like, we're this kind of metal, and it gives the listener a somewhat clear idea. I think at the same time it does elicit some confusion. Someone says, oh yeah, I really like Khemmis, they're one of my favorite doom bands, and they're like, well, they're not a doom band, and then these two people are going to argue about it on Reddit for the next 20 minutes. and
that argument's going to be longer than any other doom metal song in history.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, right. The new Sleep album could play twice while they argue. And that's the other reason why we have always, like, I think the first descriptor we heard that we liked. Kim Kelly called us doomed rock and roll, because I think Absolution was a little bit more grounded in rock and roll than, but by the time you get to our stuff now, it's more sort of in the realm of Iron Maiden, Merciful Fate kind of stuff mixed with doom. But we always want to have that descriptor doom attached, because there's an emphasis in doom broadly on emotion and feeling in a way that there's not in a lot of other metal. So for instance, two of my favorite bands of all time are Neurosis and Yob. They have the ability to convey emotion in just a couple of notes or a simple vocal line in a way that I don't personally feel most other musicians of any genre or caliber are capable of doing.
Yeah.
But that's accepted in the context of doom. Yeah. There's a set of historical precedents for that. And that may exist to some extent in like traditional heavy metal, but as much as I love death metal and black metal and grindcore, there's no real space for that there, or very little space for that, I'll say, right? Yeah. If Cannibal Corpse wrote an album that was all about, feeling despondent and adrift in the sort of cosmic sea, everybody would hate it, and everybody would make fun of Corpse Grinder. But there is, some, not just some degree, I think a large degree of acceptance for that, and that's good, because that's the kind of music and the kind of storytelling that we find ourselves drawn to and that we think is most compelling, and for us has allowed us to both connect with other musicians who have influenced us, and in turn has allowed us to connect with our fans and younger musicians who find something compelling and empowering about the stories that we tell.
Definitely. That was the best conclusion to an interview ever. Thank you.
Right on.
So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time. I'm sending you and your friends, your family, and all the band mates, my best wishes during this rather uncertain time. Is there just anything else with Khemmis that you would like to promote in terms of shows that aren't at the risk of getting canceled? Or
I don't even know what all. We just canceled the European tour. Monolith on the Mesa that we were going to be playing in May in Mexico just got rescheduled for the fall. But I will say that I just want to thank everyone so much for their support so far. I mean, we've said it before, but when we started this band, we had no expectation of anything other than we wanted to play shows to get, some free drink tickets and play shows with bands that we liked and respected. We didn't expect it to get to this place, and we're very, very thankful for it. $20 Ben they're handling the physical release for Doomed Heavy Metal, and Dave just put up the mock-ups of the color variants for the vinyl, which looks super sick. So for all the vinyl heads out there, they can hop on that. There is an exclusive for Record Store Day that got rescheduled for later this summer. I don't know the date off the top of my head, but if you're a vinyl collector, you can ask your local record store to order that colorway. It will only be available in local record stores, not, as far as I know, anywhere online. So that's a cool thing. And if you don't get down with physical stuff, you can pre-order it through Bandcamp and pre-save it on the, all your streaming stuff. Although, please buy it, because streaming pays us like 1/1000th of a nickel for every stream. Mm. So it's hard to pay the bills as a band. It's extra hard when all your tours get canceled. So if you have a couple bucks, treat yourself to some kick-ass vinyl, and we would appreciate it.
Definitely. Did you see that meme that they made where a band is filing for the unemployment that they're out, and, yeah. And it says, "Oh, great, you're qualified to have 20 drink tickets."
Yeah, that one was a little too real. That went around in a lot of group chats and stuff, and we were all like, "Ha oh."
Yeah, you were laughing and wanting and punching a wall at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Why did I do this?
But Ben, great to talk to you as always. Hope to catch you in New York again soon, and please be safe out there, man.
Sounds good. Take care of yourself as well.
Take care. Everybody, we are here with Ben of Khemmis, Doomed Heavy Metal, their EP coming out later in April. Be sure to pick that up. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.